Good morning. My name is Josiah Hostetler, and I'm so pleased to be joined by Fairfield Friends, Peace and Justice, Social Justice Committee co-chairs Anita, Camic, and Jeff Gabbard today. Please note in the bulletin that we are in a newer order of meeting for worship to allow our younger friends to participate and help with the meeting. As a reminder, please turn off your phones or put them in airplane mode to allow for the best bandwidth for those on Zoom. And we'll start off today with announcements from those joining us on Zoom. I think there'll be audio here in the... If we do not have any announcements from Zoom, we'll have friends come with the microphone to those in the meeting house if you have announcements. Yeah.
My regular announcement that today at 7 p.m. is the meeting for business, and I hope to see you all there. It's on Zoom.
We sit here today, some of us feeling alone, others feeling the presence of loved ones beside us. Some of us grieving, others joyful, and yet some of us numb. We hope to feel the light from each other, from nature, from the ever-presence of burning within us and around us. For those of us hardened, let us break and let the light in. For those of us feeling alone, let us revel in the joy of being together today. And for those grieving and in pain, know that we are held in the light. We gather today knowing the world in need of peace and healing, justice through our action, and as we gather, let silence be our gift. Amen. We'll sing the hymn Leaning on the Everlasting Long Arms, worship in song 201. Food in to donate to QNOT Food Pantry. We'll also have that be collected today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. The Stewardship Committee likes to highlight the work of a particular committee throughout the year. And this month, the committee that was chosen was Peace and Social Justice. As Josiah was saying, Anita and I are co-clerks of Peace and Social Justice. And the Peace and Social Justice Committee is charged with informing the meeting around state, local, and federal legislation and efforts having to do with social justice or environmental justice issues, and also to promote events and activities that the meeting can be involved in. This is our Earth Day service. Next week is actually Earth Day, but we're presenting today, and we had our nature hike yesterday, which went really well. And Anita has a slideshow she's going to take you through today that we hope you all enjoy. So I'll turn it over to Anita.
Yeah. I have a quick centering thought for us before Anita shares the slideshow. Several years ago, I had a free day in Boston after attending a convention there, but it was February and the snow was several feet thick. I didn't feel like slogging through the city, so I drove to Walden Pond and hiked there. It was an inspiring experience, and I found reflection from an NPR correspondent, Tom Vitale, to share with you. Henry David Thoreau spent hours hiking in the woods near his small cabin on Walden Pond. He figured out that the way to break through his own way of doing things was to think as he walked, explains biographer Laura DeSalle Walls. Thoreau was 27 years old when he built his small cabin in the woods near Concord, Mass. He set out to live a simple, solitary life, and it was there that he ended up writing his best-known works, Walden and Civil Disobedience. To do that is to break the wall between ourselves and nature, she says, and to understand that we're always a part of nature, and nature is always a part of us. So to be here and to be wholly immersed is to be hot when it's hot, to be cold when it's cold, to be hearing the birds and feeding the little mouse that lives in the cabin, is to completely demolish that barrier and understand something really fundamental about what it is to be human. When he moved to his little cabin on the pond, he was in a quest for self-discovery. He was declaring his own independence, says singer-songwriter Dan Henley. He stood up in the face of the Industrial Revolution, Henley explains. He said, wait a minute. We have to slow down, take a look around us, and not destroy what's left. His famous quote was, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." It's difficult to be 150 years ahead of your time, but he was. Thoreau moved to Walden Pond to think through his life, and also the life of the nation, Walls says. He thinks something is going deeply wrong with America, and he's trying to figure out what is the foundational problem that gives rise to such destructive habits and patterns of life that we could imagine it's okay to enslave people. Reading through his journal, reflections on nature are interspersed with rage-filled entries. Christine Nelson, curator of a Thoreau bicentennial celebration at the Morgan Library in New York City, points out one example from 1851 in which Thoreau writes, "Do we call this the land of the free? What is it to be free from King George and continue the slaves of prejudice?" The Morgan exhibition includes the author's handwritten journals, along with artifacts from his life. Visitors can see the actual lock from the jail cell where Thoreau spent a night for refusing to pay his taxes to a government that sanctioned slavery and waged what he considered an illegal war against Mexico. The experience inspired his essay, Civil Disobedience, a tract urging nonviolent resistance to unjust laws that later influenced Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Kevin Dan, author of a new Thoreau biography, says, Thoreau's overriding theme, the sovereignty of the individual, is why the author is more relevant now than ever. Just look, he says, at the nation's systems and police brutality. Everybody in this country is afraid, says Dan. If Thoreau were alive today, Dan believes, he would have been out there and he would have been shouting from the rafters, "People, go into the street. You have no sovereignty anymore. It is gone."
Good morning, everyone. As Jeff mentioned, what I'm going to present today is in recognition of Earth Day, which I believe is next Saturday, the 22nd. I think some of you know that I'm involved in Quaker Earth Care Witness, which is also known as QEW, as a steering committee member, and I'm also involved in the publications committee as well. QEW has an offering that they call QEW Presents, and several of the steering committee members have presentations that they make to different meetings, live or via Zoom. And at the last steering committee meeting in October, Jim Kessler is a friend at Grinnell Friends Church in Grinnell, Iowa. And he presented this slide deck that he has written and photos that he's taken and taken from archives as well. But he presented this presentation to us at the steering committee meeting, and I thought it was just so beautiful. It really moved me, and so I wanted to share it with everyone, and we thought what a perfect opportunity to do it in recognition and honor of Earth Day. So I hope you enjoy it. I think it's beautiful. It gives me hope and inspiration, and that's kind of what it's all about. That's one of the things that makes me want to get outside and get in nature. It keeps me hopeful. So and I will say, I don't know if he's on or not, but I did, Jim, graciously allowed us to share his presentation and his script that he'd already put together. And I did send him the Zoom links to our meeting today so he could join in with us, but I'm not sure if he was able to do that or not. So I don't know if you can see if Jim's on or not. But if he is, a warm welcome. And if not, I hope I do his slideshow justice. So with that, I have to take my glasses off so I can see. This first slide, the whole presentation, this is Restoring Life and Hope, Renewing Biodiversity, Mind, Body, and Spirit. I think it's important to point out mind, body, and spirit. In this presentation, Jim shares his journey as he restored his own acreage to its natural prairie habitat. Jim shares that his journey began in 1970 at the University of Northern Iowa, close to the first Earth Day as a grad student in biology. He read a Sierra Club book entitled A Moment in the Sun, which detailed the environmental crisis, and that new awareness changed the direction of his life. Later in 1972, when he had just started his career as a biology teacher at Newton High School, the county naturalist drove him to a virgin prairie on a steep hillside. It was the most diverse and beautiful natural area he had ever seen. A year later, it was sold, plowed, planted to corn, and later was put in the Conservation Reserve Program. Often driving past that spot on the way to Grinnell Friends Church, Jim and his wife Kathy deeply grieved its loss. They talked about eventually buying land near their church in Grinnell and restoring it into native habitat. He later planted a backyard prairie wildflower garden in the mid-1970s and began to manage the Newton High School prairie. This is Jim. This is Jim and his wife Kathy, taken for their 50th anniversary. I wanted to share this. Jim's wonderfully interesting man. He has shared quite a lot on in our QEW meetings. This is shortly before COVID shut down. In 1998, they purchased 30 acres south of Grinnell, Iowa, and the realization of their dream began. Jim shares that the restoration process has contributed more than you can imagine to the mental, physical, and spiritual health of his family. They have always viewed restoring a piece of God's creation as an important part of their Quaker Christian faith. So this is a picture of the east 10 acres of an old crop field planted with brome grass in 1998. The west 10 acres included an old weedy bluegrass pasture, degraded oak savannas and wetlands, and a creek. The southernmost 10 acres consisted of an almost impassable oak hickory timber clogged with downed wood and shade-loving trees. So he calls this slide a site ready to seed. They first had to clear the area of dead vegetation and living plants to prepare for seeding. So native seed, he titles as Seeding the Prairie Reconstruction. And this seems to be labor intensive in what Jim did. Native seed must be bulked up by mixing it with wood bedding with medium-sized pieces. They seeded their prairies by hand using rows of wire flags to mark seeding aisles. So this is first year prairie, and I think first year prairie, this just looks lush to me. A first year seeding always is a weedy mess, he says. Patience is the only answer. Lesson. Restoration of habitats is a long-distance event, not a sprint. Although there are restored woodland, wetland, and oak savanna habitats on the property, this presentation will focus on the prairie restorations to illustrate how biodiversity has increased and how the mental, physical, and spiritual health of his family has been impacted positively. So they started controlled burns. As some of us are aware, this is an ancient indigenous method. They started controlled burns as soon as there was enough dead plant residue to support fire. He clarifies that the controlled burns are necessary every 3 or 4 years to rejuvenate the prairie and to control shrub and tree invasions. The soil warms more rapidly after a burn, which stimulates earlier and more vigorous plant growth. So spring green up. So after the spring burn, the prairie plants green up. Isn't this beautiful? I just think it's beautiful. Early succession. During the early years, many wildflowers predominate. And as the prairie matured, additional species like western ironweed, the purple flower in this picture, begin to appear. Later succession, as prairie succession continues, more species appear. And about 20 years after the original seeding, a mature prairie is present here with close to 60 species of native wildflowers and grasses. Pale purple coneflower, white flowering spurge, and yellow prairie coreopsis are blooming in this photo. So the Burr Oak Land Trust and the Kessler Prairie, in order to ensure permanent protection and management, the Kesslers donated 26 acres to the Burr Oak Land Trust in Iowa City. The trust sends their AmeriCorps crew frequently to help with prescribed burns and restoration projects. So restoring biodiversity and spring wildflowers, the following slides are a few examples of the prairie blooms in the prairie that was created. And we're just going to run through some of these. I think these slides showing the individual species that have been restored to this prairie, you know, it's just beautiful, and it's amazing to me personally that this is just the variety of species that are native and what can be restored. It's really phenomenal. So the previous slide was prairie violet. This is golden Alexander. Wild plum, which is a prairie shrub. I did not know that. Wild indigo, and then shooting star. And one more, I think. Oh, yes. And so this is Ohio spiderwort. Each year, the Ohio spiderwort blooming in the front prairie is a feast for the eyes. I would agree. So restoring biodiversity, summer prairie wildflowers. So, you know, there's a seasonal shift. So the purple flowers are, in this photo, are ironweeds. The light-colored flowers are wild bergamot or bergamot. And the yellow flowers are oxeyes. And so we're, again, purple, these are pale purple coneflowers. This is the pale yellow coneflowers. And purple, say that 3 times, purple prairie clover. And Culver's root. And butterfly milkweed, one of my faves. This is blazing star and oxeye together here. And restoring biodiversity, fall wildflowers and grasses. The dead tree in the background in this photo has hosted bald eagles, ospreys, and many red-tailed hawks, Jim knows. Rosin weed, stiff goldenrod, showy goldenrod, big blue stem grass, Indian grass, smooth blue aster, New England aster. So the pollinator crisis. Insect population numbers are in rapid decline. Scientists have called this an insect apocalypse. Honeybee and native bee populations are rapidly declining in part because non-native flowers, lawn grasses, and crop fields provide very little food for them. Pesticides compound the problem. We can reverse the rapid decline in pollinator populations by planting habitats using native plants. There are 2 simple ways to help honeybees, native bees, butterflies, and other native pollinators. We must add lots of native plants back into our landscapes and plant them as far away from pesticide spraying as possible. Without pollinators, the nutritious fruits and vegetables, a third of our food supply, would mostly disappear from our grocery produce shelves. Pollinator conservation is essential to human nutrition and health. Saving biodiversity, if you plant natives, the pollinators will come. Some examples of bee populations that have increased dramatically since the Kesslers planted the prairies follow. The Burr Oak Land Trust visited their property at the height of the season when pollinators collect pollen and nectar for winter. The trust told the Kesslers they had observed more pollinator activity in one of their original prairie plantings than they had observed in any of the other Burr Oak properties. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. This is an American bumblebee on foxglove beard tongue, a bumblebee on pale yellow coneflower, a honeybee, black and gold bumblebee on wild bergamot. This is a honeybee on mountain mint, common eastern bumblebee on showy goldenrod, honeybees and soldier bees pollinating showy goldenrod. A field of showy goldenrod. A field of showy goldenrod alive with thousands of bees and other pollinators. Native plants provide a feast for butterflies. So this is a red admiral butterfly on pale purple coneflower. This is a gray hair streak butterfly on ox eye. I'd never heard of that. And then a great spangled fritillary on butterfly milkweed. The larvae of this butterfly feed on several native violet species that are found in their prairies. This is of the Kessler's prairies. This is an example of how biodiversity matters to the survival of individual species. And then this is a viceroy butterfly on rattlesnake master, one of my fave plants. Monarchs in the oak savanna. So Barb Briggs, a Quaker nature photographer and author of several children's books from Grinnell Meeting, took this photo of monarchs roosting in one of the bur oaks and one of the Kessler's savannas, where they had also seeded tall purple hyssop. 2 years ago, during their fall migration, a huge number of monarchs stopped to feed on the flowers of this plant for about 10 days. That was a feast for the eyes and the soul and a boost to mental and spiritual well-being. Restoring biodiversity, vertebrate wildlife. As the health of the prairie increased, wildlife returned to their property and populations increased. There's a gray tree frog, which, that's a misnomer, right? Because that looks green to me. I mean, he calls it a gray tree frog. I believe him. And a northern green snake here that the kids are holding, which is a species of concern, apparently. I didn't know. As an outdoor Easter egg hunt was winding down, one of the Kessler's grandchildren discovered this northern green snake. It's an Iowa DNR species of concern, but the Kesslers see them every year. This is a wild turkey courtship. He says during some springs, they are sometimes privileged to watch wild turkeys courting. Jim found a nest with about a dozen eggs in 2019. And tree swallows. Tree swallows produce many young in the nest boxes annually. They have bluebirds. Watching the bluebirds, barn swallows, and tree swallows fills us with wonder, he writes. They have often observed large swarms of swallows and dragonflies performing their amazing aerial acrobatics while catching insects over the prairies. And goldfinches on the prairies. Yellowthroat. We often hear the witchety, witchety, witchety song of the yellowthroat and the lovely trilling of field sparrows, he says. This is a badger. They have observed a badger in their prairies, which was very exciting. They have encountered young red foxes on their property numerous times. A bobcat. A deer hunter on their property has observed a large bobcat on the Kessler Prairie from a deer stand. Recently, a cougar with 2 cubs was spotted in their neighborhood. And this was apparently a photo that Jim took himself. I just think that's amazing. Jim says, I never dreamed that I would be able to take a picture like this. Always, but especially during the pandemic, the beauty of the native habitats has sustained our mental, physical, and spiritual health. Hoarfrost on the prairie has often turned the dormant dead stalks of wildflowers and grasses into spectacular jewels. The scripture from Psalms, this is the day the Lord has made, let us rejoice and be glad in it, is a phrase I often repeat as I daily experience the joyfulness that I experience through nature. So one of the things that Jim wanted to share with everyone and alert everyone, this is a photo of Doug Tallamy, and one of the books he's authored, I think it's a more recent book. Oh gosh, now the name's escaped me. Maybe somebody knows it. I can't think. Anyway, the Homegrown National Park. This is a Homegrown National Park movement. Jim writes that one of his contemporary environmental heroes, Doug Tallamy, and he was actually just at Crawfordsville, college in Crawfordsville. Thank you, Wabash. And I totally missed it. I had it on my calendar. I wanted to go hear him so badly, and I think Laura Essex did, and I just completely spaced it. But anyway, Jim writes that one of his contemporary environmental heroes, Doug Tallamy, accurately explains that native habitats, songbirds, pollinators, and wildlife cannot survive unless individuals, begin to plant natives on their properties. Depending on protected habitats and parks to save biodiversity is not enough. Dr. Tallamy tours the country explaining the Homegrown National Park concept. He promotes planting natives on half the yard and privately owned acreages in the U.S. This is a grassroots effort that can save biodiversity and restore essential free ecosystem services that we depend on. The biodiversity crisis is a problem that ordinary people can solve through simple actions. Tallamy states, every human on this planet needs diverse, highly productive ecosystems to survive. If we can destroy habitat with blinding speed, we also have the intelligence, knowledge, and ability to restore it. It remains to be seen whether we have the wisdom to do so, but I, for one, believe we do. Planting natives and inspiring others to do likewise is part of a hopeful way to confront the biodiversity crisis. So the Homegrown National Park poster and website address, I did want to share this. Jim shares this in his presentation. I think it's a fantastic idea. Having the amount of turf lawn in the U.S. with natives would be a double win for the environment. That single action can help to confront both the biodiversity and climate crises. Turf lawns are an ecological catastrophe. Mowing turf lawns in the U.S. produces 60 to 45 billion tons of carbon emissions annually. Fertilizer and herbicide production for use on lawns also emits carbon into the atmosphere. Carbon emissions from turf grass management far exceed the amount sequestered in the grasses. Conversely, each acre of turf replaced by quality native plantings sequesters up to 1 ton of carbon each year. This is a photo of planting Grinnell Friends Church butterfly garden. So in 2015, Grinnell Friends Church planted a 250 square foot native plant butterfly garden. This garden was made possible by a $500 matching QEW mini grant, which is a program of QEW that I would like to pursue. So Grinnell Friends Church Butterfly Garden. This is a photo of the garden in bloom as it has matured. Jim says he would encourage you to plant natives in your yards, both in sunny and shaded areas, and to spread the word to your friends and relatives about the urgency of planting natives to combat the extinction crisis, which includes the decline of pollinators. If you think you are too small to make a difference, you haven't spent a night in a tent with a mosquito. So the Lorax, the dystopian, in other words, really, really bad future portrayed in Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, when native plants disappear, is analogous to our current dilemma. The Oncelers, I think I've got that right, plea to plant the truffula seed for a better tomorrow is instructive. Planting butterfly gardens, prairies, wetlands, savannas, woodlands, and other native habitats can reverse the rapid decline in biodiversity and help to combat climate change. Ordinary folks like us must help to create a world where our descendants can thrive. Jim concludes his presentation with a quote from E.O. Wilson. There can be no purpose more inspiring than to begin the age of restoration, reweaving the wondrous diversity of life that surrounds us. So I hope you enjoyed that presentation. I have a few thoughts on the using native plants that I want to share, but I hope you enjoyed that when Jim shared this presentation at the steering committee meeting. It just made me happy, and it gave me hope. I look around at an awful lot of lawns with not one darn weed for the butterflies and the bees in early spring, and it makes me sad. So I look at this and I think, there's something we can all do. And maybe we don't all have prairie to restore, but if we can follow maybe Doug Tallamy's suggestion and plant a little or keep a little native, we can each do our part. So, and I believe this is from the Quaker Earth Care Witness website, Important Reasons to Use Native Plants. Important facts. Native plants are adapted to the local area and its climate. Unfortunately, many of our beautiful non-native garden flowers provide little or no food for honeybees, native pollinators, songbirds, and other wildlife. Non-native plants have the potential to become invasive species, weeds that spread rapidly and often crowd out the native species. Native plants reduce maintenance. Local native plants need no fertilization, no pesticides, and little or no watering once they're established, so they reduce maintenance costs. Native wildflowers and grasses are beautiful, produce a wide variety of shapes, colors, and bloom times. Native plants increase critical wildlife habitat. Loss of native plant habitat is the main cause of local extinctions of native wildlife. Since urban development and agriculture have removed a large percentage of native plant populations from the landscape, many pollinators, songbirds, and other native wildlife populations are rapidly declining. According to an October 2014 report from the World Wildlife Fund, the world's vertebrate wildlife has declined by 52% during the last 40 years. I find that heartbreaking. Many wildlife species will become extinct without the restoration of native plant populations that provide their food and shelter. Planting native trees, shrubs, wildflowers, and grasses in yards, on acreages and farms, on corporate property, and in public spaces can reverse this decline. Native plants help our songbirds. Migrating songbird populations have declined 1% annually during the last 50 years. Do the math. Songbirds feed their young insect larvae, which are found mostly on native plants. The result of declining native plant populations from the landscape is that many baby birds starve. Planting natives in urban yards and rain gardens increases songbird populations. Using native plants saves monarch butterflies. Monarch butterfly populations are declining very rapidly due to the loss of milkweed populations. Planting local native milkweed species in gardens and other residential landscapes is crucial to the survival of monarch butterflies. And I don't know, we saw the orange butterfly weed in Jim's presentation. It's a beautiful plant. Common milkweed that you see along the side of the road. I don't know if you all are aware, but it has a beautiful and beautifully fragrant bloom. I let it grow in my garden. Using native plants increases vital honeybee and native pollinator populations. The current pollinator crisis is important to everyone. Every 3 bites that we eat requires insect pollination. 80% of our plants cannot produce seeds without insect pollination and would become extinct without pollinators. Honeybees, native bees, and other native pollinators are declining because there are not enough native wildflowers to supply the nectar they need to stay healthy. Widely used neonicotinoid pesticides are insect nerve toxins that are especially deadly to bees and other pollinators. The solution to our pollinator crisis is to plant lots of local native wildflowers and to keep them free of pesticides. Native plantings also increase populations of other beneficial insects that feed on insect pests in our yards and gardens. So gardeners can make a difference, a significant difference, for honeybees, native pollinators like the monarch butterfly, songbirds, and other wildlife populations by planting natives in yards and acreage. Your native plant garden or larger native planting can be part of that difference. And the last thing I want to share is a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer. How in our modern world can we find our way to understand the earth as a gift again, to make our relations with the world sacred again? Thank you.
We'll sing from Worship in Song, number 185, Amazing Grace. Let us no longer be blinded by hidden theology that only in the far-seeing vision discovers a millennium, where violence shall no more be heard in the land, wasting nor destruction in her borders. But let us behold it now, nigh at the door, lending faith and confidence to our hopes, assuring us that even we ourselves shall be instrumental in proclaiming liberty to the captive. Greet your friends.